April 1945. The war that had consumed Europe for 6 long years was finally coming to an end. In the streets of Berlin, Dresden, Hamburg, and countless towns, silence replaced the roar of bombers and artillery. German civilians, who had endured nights in cramped shelters and watched their cities crumble, stepped out into a world unrecognizable. Rubble lined every street. Once proud buildings reduced to hollow shells, windows shattered, roofs torn away, smoke still rising from smoldering ruins. Families clutched what little they could salvage, searching desperately for neighbors, relatives, anyone who had survived. The scale of destruction was incomprehensible, a testament to a war that had spared no one. Children wandered through streets, their eyes wide, holding on to each other as though sheer contact could protect them from the devastation around them. Elderly men and women leaned on crumbling walls, silent tears mingling with dust. The air itself seemed heavy with grief and disbelief. In this moment of fragile dawn, a mixture of fear, sorrow, and relief washed over the survivors. The fighting had stopped, but the echoes of explosions, the ghosts of lives lost, and the sheer emptiness of the cities remained. And yet, amid the ruins, something else was stirring. A quiet curiosity, a cautious hope for those who had never traveled beyond their borders. The distant tales of foreign lands, of cities untouched by bombings, streets bustling with life, skyscrapers piercing the clouds, lingered in conversations and whispered dreams. Little did they know, soon they would encounter a world so vast, so vibrant, that it would challenge everything they had ever imagined about life beyond their own shattered streets. As dawn broke over the scarred landscapes, the first figures of the Allied forces appeared on the horizon. American soldiers moved cautiously through the ruined streets, their boots crunching on broken bricks and shattered glass. For German civilians, this was a sight both bewildering and surreal. Mothers clutched their children tighter, unsure whether to flee or to observe. Men, exhausted from years of hiding and surviving, peeked from the corners of collapsed buildings. The uniformed strangers carried no banners of conquest, only expressions of watchful intent, their presence a mixture of authority and reassurance. The interactions began slowly. A soldier offered bread to a family huddled among ruins. Another handed a blanket to a shivering child. OTT first. The civilians hesitated, their eyes wary, their bodies tense from years of fear and conflict. But, gradually, understanding grew, a fragile, tentative trust. In these moments, small gestures held immense significance. A handshake, a nod, the simple passing of supplies became acts of human connection amid the devastation. Conversations began in broken words and gestures, bridging the gap between conqueror and survivor, between foreign soldier and wary civilian. The streets, once echoing only with the screams of war, now carried tentative laughter, murmurs of curiosity, and cautious gratitude. Germans began to glimpse that life, though shattered, could continue. They had endured fire and fury. But now, in the presence of these strangers, there was a sense that the world beyond their ruins was reaching out to them, inviting them to step forward, to rebuild, and to imagine a life beyond the shadows of destruction. With the first cautious interactions behind them, German civilians began to truly confront the scale of the destruction around them. Streets that once bustled with life were now unrecognizable piles of bricks and splintered wood stretched for blocks. Twisted metal littered intersections, and skeletal frameworks of homes reached skyward like silent monuments to what had been lost. Families wandered through the ruins, picking their way over rubble, searching for personal belongings that might still survive amid the chaos. The sounds of the city were a hollow echo, distant bells, the occasional crash of collapsing walls, and the murmurs of the living navigating this broken landscape. Children held tightly to the hands of parents, their small feet stepping over debris that could have easily concealed danger. Elderly residents paused often, touching remnants of walls or door frames, as if saying goodbye to their memories before moving forward. Photographs, letters, and shattered household items scattered across the streets told stories of lives abruptly interrupted. Each corner revealed the toll of war. A scorched marketplace, a church reduced to rubble, a school where chalkboards now hung askew from charred walls. And yet, amid the despair, small sparks of resilience appeared. Neighbors helped each other lift beams and clear pathways. Communities gathered in temporary shelters, sharing what little food remained. Every act, no matter how small, carried the weight of survival and the quiet determination to endure. as the civilians walked through the ruins. Their eyes began to widen not only at the destruction but also at the thought that rebuilding would require strength, courage, and cooperation on a scale they had never imagined. For the first time, they realized the depth of what had been lost in the magnitude of the challenge that lay ahead. As the dust settled and the civilians roamed the ruined streets, a new presence began to bring a glimmer of hope. American trucks, laden with supplies, rumbled carefully over the broken roads, their engines a strange and comforting sound in the devastated towns. Soldiers moved efficiently, distributing food, blankets, and medical aid to families who had gone weeks, sometimes months, without sufficient nourishment. For many, it was the first taste of fresh bread, warm soup, or clean clothing in years. The simple act of receiving these supplies sparked smiles that had been absent for far too long. Children approached cautiously, their hands outstretched, eyes wide with curiosity and disbelief. Mothers and fathers, while grateful, could not shake the lingering fear of the unknown. Years of wartime suspicion did not vanish overnight, yet, in every interaction, trust began to grow. Local leaders coordinated with American soldiers to establish distribution points, ensuring that the aid reached the most vulnerable first. Makeshift queues formed in the streets, and a sense of order returned, fragile but tangible. It was more than just food or blankets. It was a lifeline, a reminder that the world beyond their shattered cities still cared. For the first time in a long while, the civilians felt the possibility of rebuilding, of surviving, and perhaps even of seeing a future untouched by bombs. The arrival of aid carried with it a profound revelation. There existed a world beyond war, one that could offer sustenance, compassion, and the promise of reconstruction. And in the eyes of these survivors, hope, once dormant, began to stir. With the arrival of aid and the presence of American soldiers, a new kind of astonishment began to take root among German civilians. It was not only the food or blankets that intrigued them, but the glimpses of a life so different from their own, a life untouched by the constant roar of bombs. Soldiers moved through the streets with radios, cameras, and neatly folded uniforms, carrying items that seemed strange yet fascinating to onlookers. Clothing, canned goods with colorful labels, small toys, and even utensils sparked curiosity. Mothers examined simple kitchen gadgets as if they were treasures, while children marveled at sweets and candy they had only heard about. Conversations blossomed despite language barriers. Broken German words, gestures, and laughter bridged the divide as civilians began asking questions about the lives of these foreigners. They wanted to understand how, in cities far away, people lived with such abundance and variety. In the evenings, as families gathered in makeshift shelters, tales of distant lands were shared. Soldiers spoke of bustling streets, electric lights that never dimmed, and buildings that reached toward the sky. These stories, almost fantastical to those who had only known destruction, planted seeds of curiosity and wonder. For the first time in years, the survivors looked beyond mere survival. They began imagining a world beyond their shattered neighborhoods, a world of color, sound, and energy so vast it challenged everything they had come to accept as normal. And with that imagination came a subtle, undeniable spark, the beginning of a fascination with a culture and life that seemed simultaneously foreign, enchanting, and within reach. As German civilians began to hear more about life beyond their ruined cities, stories of American urban splendor spread like wildfire. Those who had traveled, been evacuated, or merely glimpsed photographs returned with tales that seemed almost unreal. Skyscrapers piercing the clouds, streets alive with bustling traffic, neon lights glowing through the night. These were images so vast and vibrant that they dwarfed even the grandest visions of pre-war Germany. For a generation that had known air raid sirens more than streetlights, the scale of American cities was both awe-inspiring and disorienting. The orderly grids, broad avenues, and towering buildings suggested a world rebuilt not from rubble, but from imagination itself. Families would gather, listening intently as neighbors recounted visits to cities like New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. They spoke of parks filled with children laughing freely, of department stores stocked with endless goods, and of the hum of automobiles that never seemed to stop. For civilians who had survived scarcity, These tales seemed almost mythical, yet they were true. The astonishment was not only about material abundance, it was the energy, the rhythm, the sheer sense of a society moving forward without the shadow of constant fear. It planted a vision in the minds of Germans that one day their cities could rise again, not merely as survivors of destruction, but as thriving centers of life, culture, and innovation. And in that vision, a subtle challenge emerged, an unspoken comparison between what had been lost and what could be gained. The war had destroyed much, but it had also shown them, through stories and glimpses, what a future of possibility could look like. Amid the rubble and emerging curiosity, German civilians paused to confront the weight of their experiences. Memories of bombed-out streets, lost neighbors, and shattered homes lingered heavily in their minds. Even as aid arrived and stories of distant prosperity sparked wonder, the past refused to be forgotten. Elderly residents would sit by the remains of their homes, fingers tracing scorched doorframes, recalling the faces of those who had not survived. Mothers whispered stories to children of what the streets once looked like, of schools and playgrounds that no longer existed. Young men and women, who had grown up in the shadow of sirens and fear, reflected on the years stolen from them, the education missed, the laughter silenced, the dreams deferred. Each personal memory carried a quiet grief, but also a spark of determination. For many, the devastation became a motivation to rebuild not only their surroundings but also their own lives. Diaries and letters surfaced, recounting moments of fear and small victories. A neighbor sharing bread, a soldier offering comfort, a child finding a toy among the rubble. These intimate stories painted a human face onto the incomprehensible scale of destruction. In these reflections, civilians began to understand that survival was not just a matter of enduring the past, but of imagining a future. The awe at distant American cities and the hope carried by relief efforts intertwined with personal memories of loss. And slowly, a collective resolve began to form, the determination that their communities would rise again, shaped by the lessons of devastation and inspired by the possibilities glimpsed beyond their borders. As the weeks passed, German civilians began to notice changes that went beyond the arrival of food and blankets. The presence of American soldiers and the subtle introduction of their culture began to leave an imprint on everyday life. Radios played unfamiliar tunes, small gadgets and household items sparked curiosity, and conversations often turned toward the customs and practices of this distant land. Children laughed at candy wrappers and toys that seemed magical to them, while teenagers observed soldiers with admiration, noting their polished uniforms, confident mannerisms, and stories of bustling American cities. Mothers and fathers marveled at kitchen tools, clothing, and household items that promised convenience and comfort unknown in the years of wartime scarcity. Schools reopened with new materials, and American stories, music, and images found their way into classrooms. The younger generation absorbed these glimpses eagerly, sparking a fascination with life beyond the bombed-out streets they had always known. Conversations in cafes, markets, and temporary shelters often centered on comparisons, how life in the United States seemed orderly, energetic, and full of opportunity. Civilians whispered about electric streetcars, skyscrapers, and abundant stores filled with goods. These glimpses of prosperity were intoxicating, creating a longing for reconstruction not only of their cities, but of their lives. And as fascination grew, a subtle cultural shift began. Germans borrowed ideas, experimented with new ways of living, and tentatively adopted customs introduced by their foreign visitors. It was the beginning of a dialogue between destruction and renewal, between the familiar and the extraordinary. American influence was not just a matter of supplies or aid, it was a window into a world of possibilities, a vision that would shape the reconstruction of Germany for decades to come. Amid the lingering echoes of destruction, German civilians began the painstaking task of rebuilding their neighborhoods. Streets once reduced to rubble now buzzed with cautious activity. Families lifting beams, clearing debris, and salvaging what could be repaired. Each stone turned, each wall reconstructed, carried the weight of survival and the hope of renewal. Men and women worked side by side, forming informal teams to restore homes and public spaces. Children assisted where they could, carrying bricks or sweeping dust-filled paths, their laughter gradually piercing the somber silence of the streets. The air, once heavy with smoke and despair, began to carry the scent of fresh wood, paint, and hope. makeshift workshops appeared, repairing furniture, utensils, and bicycles. Local markets slowly reopened, offering essentials to those who had gone without for months. Every small achievement, replacing a roof, reopening a shop, planting a garden, felt monumental, a victory against the overwhelming scale of loss. Even in this fragile renaissance, the American presence remained a guiding influence. Techniques, tools, and organizational methods introduced by soldiers or aid workers provided efficiency and inspiration. Civilians observed, learned, and adapted, blending old German resilience with new approaches. Each rebuilt doorway and cleared street corner was a testament to determination. Communities, scarred but unbroken, began to reclaim not just their homes, but their identity, piecing together the fragments of life interrupted by war. And as the neighborhoods slowly transformed from ruins into habitable spaces, a sense of agency and pride began to emerge, a quiet declaration that the people, despite everything, would endure. In the midst of reconstruction, a renewed focus on children and education began to take shape. Schools, once silent and shattered by the relentless bombings, slowly reopened their doors. Chalkboards were repaired, desks arranged, and classrooms filled with the tentative hum of young voices. Teachers returned, carrying not only lessons in reading and arithmetic, but also the responsibility of restoring hope and routine to a generation that had known little but fear. Children, some barefoot, others clutching tattered notebooks, absorbed knowledge with eagerness and wonder, eager to reclaim the normalcy stolen from them. Beyond basic education, American influences began to appear. Stories of distant cities, cultural lessons, and even songs introduced by soldiers or materials from abroad sparked curiosity about a world beyond destruction. Children marveled at photographs of bustling streets, tall buildings, and playgrounds filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the ruins surrounding them. Sports, games, and recreational activities slowly returned to life, offering moments of joy amidst the rebuilding. Parks, improvised fields, and open spaces became arenas for laughter and competition, allowing youth to feel the rhythm of childhood that war had nearly stolen. For many, this exposure to education and the promise of a broader world planted seeds of ambition. They began to dream beyond the boundaries of their devastated neighborhoods, imagining futures where they could contribute, rebuild, and perhaps one day travel to the cities they had only seen in pictures or heard about in stories. The children of post-war Germany became living symbols of resilience, hope, and the promise of a future shaped by learning and curiosity. As neighborhoods slowly regained life, attention turned to the arteries that connected them, the streets, bridges, and railways that formed the lifeblood of any city. German civilians confronted the immense task of repairing roads cracked by bombs, rails twisted from explosions, and bridges reduced to rubble. The scale of work was staggering, but so too was the determination of the people. American assistance brought new tools, techniques, and ideas. Civilians observed the efficiency of trucks, construction equipment, and organizational methods that seemed foreign yet incredibly effective. Discussions of traffic patterns, road widths, and urban planning became common as towns were not merely rebuilt, they were reimagined. Children watched wide-eyed as streets were cleared of debris and new vehicles rolled through their towns. Bicycles and trolleys returned to service, while trucks delivered food and materials to neighborhoods previously cut off by destruction. These efforts went beyond mere transportation. They were symbols of progress. Bridges that once divided communities were rebuilt, connecting people and enabling commerce. Streets once silent under layers of dust now echoed with the rhythm of daily life. Through it all, the contrast with American cities remained vivid. Germans marveled at the scale, order, and technology they had only glimpsed in photographs or heard described by returning travelers and soldiers. The reconstruction of transportation networks became not just a matter of necessity, but a window into the possibilities of modern urban life. With each repaired road and reopened railway, the promise of a connected, thriving city moved closer to reality. As the cities slowly rose from the ruins, the people of Germany began seeking moments of respite, small pockets of joy, amidst the heavy task of rebuilding. Streets once silent with grief now carried the laughter of children, the hum of conversation, and the music of renewed life. Makeshift cinemas opened in temporary halls, showing films both German and American, offering glimpses into worlds beyond destruction. Families gathered to watch, their faces illuminated by flickering light, eyes wide with wonder at stories of adventure, love, and everyday life in distant lands. Music floated through towns, American jazz and swing mixing with familiar German tunes, creating an unexpected harmony that captivated young and old alike. Children played games in cleared squares, chasing after balls, and laughter that echoed through once bombed streets. Cafes and small markets became spaces for conversation, for sharing stories, and for imagining futures. The simple act of sitting together, of hearing music, or enjoying a moment of leisure became a profound declaration that life, even after catastrophe, could hold delight. For many, these moments of entertainment were more than distraction. They were a statement of resilience. They reminded civilians that joy could coexist with sorrow, and that amidst the rubble of yesterday, the seeds of a vibrant tomorrow could already take root. The blend of German tradition with glimpses of American leisure sparked imagination, giving the people not only a reprieve from hardship, but a vision of life renewed amid the ruins and the gradual rebuilding. The role of women in German society became unmistakably vital, with so many men lost to the war, imprisoned, or still returning from distant battlefields. Women carried the weight of survival, reconstruction, and family life. They cleared rubble, managed households with limited resources, and ensured children received education and care. Their strength became the backbone of every recovering neighborhood. Mothers taught lessons of resilience, patience, and hope. Modeling. Courage for a generation that had seen too much fear. The influence of American culture subtly reshaped perceptions of women's roles. Soldiers and aid workers introduced ideas of autonomy, efficiency, and opportunity. Clothing styles, tools for household work, and even conversations about personal independence sparked curiosity and adaptation. Women experimented with new methods, sometimes blending traditional practices with innovative techniques they observed in marketplaces. Women took initiative, managing stalls, organizing deliveries, and negotiating supplies, tasks once reserved for men. In schools and community centers, they facilitated education and recreational activities, shaping the social fabric of the post-war generation. And yet, despite these responsibilities, there were moments of joy. Women sang in makeshift choirs, shared laughter over small meals, and exchanged stories about distant lands and lifestyles. Through their labor and leadership, women not only ensured survival, they became architects of a society slowly redefining itself, one that would blend resilience, tradition, and a vision of a modern, empowered role for women in the emerging Germany. As the physical reconstruction of streets and neighborhoods progressed, a far more complex challenge emerged: rebuilding the economy. Factories lay in ruins. Currency had lost much of its value, and employment was scarce. For civilians, daily survival remained a struggle even as hope slowly returned. American aid, both in material support and financial programs, became a lifeline. The distribution of food, medical supplies, and tools addressed immediate needs, while initiatives like the Marshall Plan laid the groundwork for economic recovery. Civilians learned to manage resources efficiently, reconstruct workshops, and gradually revive local industries. Marketplaces slowly regained life as trade resumed, and small businesses began reopening. Farmers repaired fields and livestock pens, producing sustenance for communities and surplus for trade. The rhythm of work became intertwined with lessons from American methods: organization, efficiency, and new technologies provided inspiration and guidance. Yet the challenges were immense. Scarcity forced innovation, collaboration, and sacrifice. Families pooled resources, neighbors assisted one another, and communities organized themselves to distribute aid fairly. The civilians' resilience was tested not only physically, but economically and emotionally. Amid these struggles, glimpses of opportunity began to emerge. Stories of American prosperity and industrial efficiency spurred ambition. Germans envisioned modern factories, thriving businesses, and cities rebuilt not only from ruble, but with the knowledge of what efficiency, innovation, and cooperation could achieve. Economic survival had become a catalyst for imagination, laying the foundation for a society determined not just to recover, but to thrive. In the shadow of destruction, the battle for health and survival was far from over. Hospitals had been damaged or destroyed, medical supplies were scarce, and disease threatened communities already weakened by hunger and hardship. German civilians faced the dual challenge of physical recovery and rebuilding the care systems that supported life itself. American medical aid brought immediate relief. Doctors, nurses, and volunteers introduced treatments, medicines, and hygiene practices that civilians had rarely seen. Temporary clinics were established, distributing vaccines, antibiotics, and basic care to the most vulnerable. Children received attention first, their fragile bodies nurtured with a sense of urgency and compassion. Civilians marveled at the efficiency and organization of these medical efforts. Clean, orderly spaces contrasted sharply with the chaos of the surrounding streets. Health education spread quickly, teaching families the importance of sanitation, nutrition, and preventative care. The influence of American practices was profound. Hospitals began to adopt modern techniques, and communities learned to organize collective health initiatives. Relief went beyond curing illness. It instilled hope, restoring faith in the possibility of living beyond the constant shadow of death. And as citizens recovered physically, they began to recover mentally as well. Each healed child, each treated wound, each renewed hospital ward became a symbol of life returning to its rightful place. The people realized that health was not merely the absence of disease, but a foundation upon which the reconstruction of families, neighborhoods, and entire cities could be built. As German civilians began to rebuild and restore their cities, the scale and sophistication of American infrastructure loomed large in their minds. Stories of wide boulevards, towering skyscrapers, expansive bridges, and electrified streetcars painted a vision far beyond anything they had known in war-torn Germany. Engineers, civic leaders, and ordinary citizens began to draw comparisons. Streets here were being repaired brick by brick. Yet, across the Atlantic, entire avenues had been meticulously planned, bustling with traffic, commerce, and innovation. Buildings rose not just for shelter, but as symbols of efficiency and modernity. For many civilians, the contrast was staggering. Electricity, clean water, public transportation, and orderly city layouts were luxuries they had never experienced consistently. The gap between survival and thriving became vividly clear. This comparison, while humbling, sparked imagination and ambition. Communities began to envision not just restoring what was lost, but improving on it. Bridges were designed with foresight, streets widened and organized for better flow, and public buildings reconstructed with efficiency and style in mind. The American example offered lessons without words, a model of what cities could achieve when planning, resources, and human ingenuity converged. And as Germans observed, measured, and learned, a quiet determination took root. A resolve to rebuild, not merely as survivors, but as architects of modern, thriving cities that could rival those they had once only dreamed of. As the civilians of Germany rebuilt their neighborhoods and compared them with the grandeur of American cities, a vision of the future began to crystallize. Beyond mere survival, people aspired to create towns and cities that were functional, vibrant, and forward-looking. A modern society born from the lessons of the past. Architects, engineers, and community leaders began to embrace ideas previously unfamiliar. Wider roads, organized public spaces, integrated transportation systems, and efficient layouts designed to serve growing populations. American methods of urban planning, industrial production, and civic management offered both inspiration and a blueprint for progress. Citizens imagined schools not just as classrooms, but as centers of learning and community. Markets, parks, and recreational areas were planned to nurture both commerce and culture. Public utilities, water, electricity, sanitation were re-envisioned, with the goal of creating cities that could sustain life and growth more efficiently than ever before. The youth, having witnessed stories and glimpses of distant cities, became active participants in this aspiration. They contributed ideas, helped rebuild, and carried forward a sense of possibility that was contagious. Parents encouraged innovation while instilling resilience, ensuring that the next generation would inherit not just repaired streets, but thriving communities. And so, from the ruins of destruction and the lessons gleaned from a distant land, Germany's citizens began to see a future that was both attainable and transformative. Aspirations were no longer confined to survival. They stretched toward modernization, progress, and a society capable of rivaling the thriving cities they had once admired from afar. As the cities slowly regained their rhythm and the first signs of modern life emerged. German civilians began to reflect deeply on the cost of war, the ruins, the loss of family and friends, the nights spent in fear. All these memories weighed heavily, yet they also imparted lessons that no history book could capture. Elderly residents spoke quietly of the skies once filled with planes, of sirens, and of nights spent huddled in cellars. Younger generations, who had grown up in shadow and silence, listened and internalized the weight of these stories. In every anecdote lay a lesson: resilience, community, and the fragile value of peace. Conversations with returning soldiers and foreign visitors brought perspective. The devastation was not unique to Germany. War left scars across nations. Yet, in the juxtaposition of destroyed cities and the thriving examples of American prosperity, civilians realized both the fragility of peace and the potential for a better future. Reflection gave rise to determination. Citizens understood that the work of rebuilding extended beyond streets and buildings. It encompassed values, society, and culture. Forging connections, fostering education, and embracing innovation became acts of quiet defiance against the horrors they had endured. And as nights fell over slowly repairing neighborhoods, a sense of collective mindfulness emerged. Every brick laid, every school reopened, every hospital restored was not just an act of survival, it was a testament to humanity's ability to endure, to reconcile, and to aspire toward a world where peace could prevail. As the physical and social reconstruction progressed, a quieter, yet equally profound transformation took place. The shaping of a new cultural identity, the presence of American influences, music, film, fashion, and technology intertwined with Germany's own traditions, creating a cultural tapestry that reflected resilience, curiosity, and adaptation. In theaters and cinemas, American films played alongside German classics, introducing new narratives, humor, and ideas to eager audiences. Jazz and swing music found their way into local halls and makeshift gatherings, often blending seamlessly with traditional melodies. Children laughed and danced, discovering joy in forms previously foreign, while adults marveled at the richness of this cultural fusion. Schools and community centers became hubs of cultural exchange, where stories, ideas, and practices were shared. Citizens experimented with new cooking methods, clothing styles, and household tools inspired by American life, all while retaining the essence of German tradition. This cultural evolution was not merely imitation, it was a conscious, creative act. Germans adapted, blended, and innovated, forging a legacy that honored survival while embracing possibilities. It symbolized the triumph of curiosity, the human desire to connect with the broader world, and the capacity to build something new from the fragments of destruction. By weaving foreign influences with their own heritage, Germans laid the groundwork for a vibrant society, one that would not only recover from the past, but thrive culturally, socially, and emotionally. The scars of war remained, yet from them arose a legacy that spoke of adaptation, hope, and the enduring spirit of humanity. As the sun rose over streets slowly regaining life, the people of Germany stood at the threshold of a new era. The scars of war remained, etched into walls, memories, and landscapes, but they no longer defined the spirit of the nation. Citizens had endured the unimaginable, survived the darkest nights, and begun the painstaking work of rebuilding both cities and lives. Children played where rubble once lay, schools buzzed with energy, and families reclaimed the rhythm of daily life. Streets and bridges, repaired and modernized, symbolized a fusion of resilience, ambition, and vision. The lessons learned from American cities' innovation, organization, and a glimpse of prosperity were no longer distant dreams but blueprints for the future. Communities embraced new ideas while preserving their heritage, creating a society that valued culture, education, and opportunity. Women, who had carried the weight of survival, now inspired leadership in civic life. The youth, once confined by fear and destruction, carried the energy and imagination to shape a modern Germany. And so, amid streets rebuilt, schools reopened, and communities thriving, a powerful truth emerged. From devastation came hope, from destruction came learning, and from survival came the courage to envision a future unbound by the horrors of the past. Germany looked forward, not in fear, but with determination, creativity, and a profound understanding that the human spirit, when guided by resilience and vision, could transform even the darkest chapters of history into stories of renewal, progress, and enduring legacy.